Hello everyone. Some 12 years ago, two guys walked into the OAG offices in Luton from a company called Dohop based in Reykjavík, Iceland. They were looking for schedules data to drive some innovative products they were creating around self-connecting passengers, combining the rapid growth in low-cost airlines with the emergent market and boom in leisure travel. 12 years later, I've caught up with David and we've had a chat about how Dohop has innovated, transitioned its strategy in recent years, and most importantly about the success and his optimism for the future. I hope you enjoy the chat and look forward to the next podcast. So David, thank you for taking the time to join me from Reykjavík. It's a fascinating story, but who are Dohop?
Well, Dohop originally comes from Iceland, as you say. So we're based in Reykjavík in Iceland, and we were originally founded in 2004 as a flight meta search website, much like Skyscanner and Kayak, and actually around the same time. So it was at the time where one of our co-founders was living in southern France and continually kind of piecing together low-cost flights out of Iceland somewhere into Europe and then on to Nice. And that was a problem at the time that wasn't really solved or solvable by any means other than a spreadsheet. So Dohop was born, and same for Kayak and Skyscanner. It was at this time when low-cost carriers had proliferated and there was no way to combine them with anything else. So it made sense.
And that must have been really challenging because, from somewhere in the south of France to find some of the more obscure destinations in Europe without that connectivity, it was just almost impossible at that moment, wasn't it?
It was. And that's really, I suppose, what formed the basis of Dohop's approach and our approach to flight search and what has led into our approach to kind of what we do today. And we can talk more about that later. Mm-hmm. But it's this fundamental thing of saying, okay, there are more ways in the world of traveling than actually just through marketed connections on a full service carrier. There's these obscure airports where somebody flies into and another airline flies out of, but you can pair those together.
And the challenge, I suspect, is not just the technical parts, which must have been daunting, but even for the traveller to understand the concept at the very beginning was a complete breakthrough moment, wasn't it? Because it was just so unconventional to think you would create your own connection, essentially.
Absolutely. And I think to some extent, the general traveler doesn't really today understand what's going on. I think what we did in the beginning is we would find these types of journeys and string these kind of one-way flights or two round trips from separate airlines together, but we wouldn't provide any booking facility. So the customer we always had a huge kind of demand on the customer that they would go to two separate airline websites and fill in all of their details twice, and they would then be exposed to to potentially missing the flight at the connecting airport. So that until our good friends at Kiwi.com came along, that booking element wasn't there. And I think that was a huge challenge, a barrier for people to embrace this. And I think still today, when people book a virtual interline or a kind of an unorthodox connection, they really don't appreciate what's going on.
Yeah, it is daunting. So that's where the business started. But
Yes.
I suspect you wouldn't consider yourself a Skyscanner or a Kiwi type business now, would you?
Not at all. That transition, I suppose it's fair to say that transition is still taking place. As in Iceland, we're a very well-known brand. Yes, it's a small market, but we're a well-known brand for flight search in Iceland. So we maintain that website mainly for Icelanders. But that transition from a flight search website to essentially, a technology company mainly directed at airlines and working with airlines, that transition actually started in 2014 or 2012 technically, but with an airport. So in 2012, 2013, Milan Malpensa Airport came to us and they had built this product that was a ground product mainly at the airport called Via Milano. And they wanted an online extension of that to be able to sell the kinds of connections that they were facilitating on the ground, mainly Easyjet to Easyjet, because they're a big hub for Easyjet, or Easyjet to somebody else. They wanted to not only facilitate those connections on the ground when people had separately booked them, but wanted to create a sales channel for that under the Via Milano brand.
Right.
And that was our first foray into this.
And then you had other airports follow, I think, didn't you? Because were you involved in the Gatwick Self-Connect product and others?
Exactly. So I think Gatwick is probably the most high-profile one that followed. So in 2014, Gatwick figured out that they're, of course, a very large Easyjet. Well, I suppose it's not right to say that they're a large Easyjet hub, but they're definitely an airport that has a lot of Easyjet direct routes to and from. So they came to us in 2014, and they had built Gatwick Connects on the ground, which was a very nice desk in baggage claims where you could drop off your bag if you were connecting from an Easyjet flight onto another one. It's a great product, but they wanted the same thing. They wanted an online extension and a sales channel to that product. But they said, what we had developed for Via Milano was still missing the booking offering. So we couldn't make two simultaneous bookings and a single payment and a single card transaction in as we do today,
right,
for the Via Milano piece. But we did that for Gatwick. So we built and launched that for Gatwick, and about that same time, Kiwi had started doing that, but direct to consumer. So our route was really never direct to consumer. It's really always initially through airports like Milan Malpensa and Gatwick, but then of course that led us ultimately to working with Easyjet. That was the first airline that we worked with in this capacity.
I was going to say, there seems to be a common denominator between Milan and Gatwick in that Easyjet, for both of them, are a very large and growing established airline. So it was probably no coincidence that you ended up being drawn towards Easyjet in some shape or fashion.
No, absolutely. And we were, throughout 2015-16, we worked with Easyjet to, it's actually an interesting story. We worked with them to scope this out. So, many meetings in the hangar at Luton, and we scoped out what this could look like for Easyjet, and then they turned that into an RFP process, which we were then kicked out of.
Oh, I bet that made you feel good.
That was fun. And then somebody won the RFP. They tried to do stuff for 6 months, didn't work out, and Easyjet came back to us and said, okay, can you guys just do this? So, and we did.
And I guess the commercial terms were a little bit stronger for you than they were 6 months earlier.
Well, yeah, you'd think so.
I'd like to think so. So I mean, the plan changed, and how did the guys working there and the team embrace that? Because it's transformational. It's occurred over a gentle period of time, but it is still a fundamental change in the sector, isn't it? And what you're doing.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I'd say, if there's one thing looking back, I'd say, of course, it would have been nice to transition faster and to have had the ability to transition faster. The problem was that, it's when you have a nice business that generates cash, which the MetaSearch piece, part of the business, the original business, was certainly doing. Mm-hmm. Then you're reluctant to kind of spin that off or sell it or simply dismantle it. I mean, in favor of a completely new business, even if that new business certainly has more potential. But so that had to be a slow transition for us, and that's okay. And interestingly, most of the people who are working in the company today have been here for less than 5-6 years, which is about the time where this transition has been taking place.
Right.
So we have, of course, certain I mean, well, a lot of them have more experience elsewhere, but in this company, this is pretty much what they know.
Okay.
Which makes life a little bit easier. But people are always still, people are very reluctant in terms of, shutting down the website or really changing the face of the company, especially here in Iceland, where we're headquartered and where I'd say half of the employees are based, and will remain, will still be based.
Mm-hmm. And that's a good point. I mean, it's so you moved out of that space where you had some competition that you've already mentioned, but were you moving into a space where it was virgin territory? There was no competition. I can't think of anyone who was filling that space. So that must have been a key driver and reason behind the switch.
Absolutely. I mean, the metasearch space was a complete red ocean, and two incumbents, kind of Kayak and Skyscanner, very, very large and successful companies. And I'd say, and then you had Google Flights coming onto the scene somewhere in that period as well.
Yeah.
So I'd say that's a complete red ocean space, and we didn't really have, we had a friends and family type investment into the company at that time, and we didn't really have anything special to kind of bring to the party in that sense. But we really saw that what we were doing with Gatwick, with Easyjet, and then subsequently with Easyjet and others, I mean, then we had something to bring to the party. We had some kind of unique selling points or unique abilities or unique understanding of how to sell these kinds of connections, etc., that we could offer. And that was certainly a blue ocean space, where nobody was doing that. At least nobody was doing that from an airline perspective or enabling airlines to step into the space. And that's definitely what attracted us to it. And we saw that we could do it. And we saw that it was a huge opportunity. And it certainly turned out to be. Although, well, current events notwithstanding. But,
well, yes. Until 2019, it was a great opportunity.
Yes, certainly. And 2020 started out. I mean, we had an amazing January of 2020, but that was pretty much it.
So how big is Dohop? I have this vision of an office in Keflavik, but actually, as you say, 50% of the employees are there, but it spreads a lot further than that, hasn't it?
Absolutely. We started out here in Iceland, and we plan to continue here, but today we have about 30 people who come to the office in Iceland on any kind of regular basis. And actually, at the moment, we're allowed to come to the office. There were actually no infections yesterday. I just saw before we started chatting here on the news. So
that's good.
We're almost there in terms of the infection rates, and then we have a couple of bases. We're slowly forming a base in Sweden because Icelanders like moving to Sweden, so we have a few employees there, and we actually run a call center operation because not only do we sell these or enable airlines to sell these kinds of connections, but we service them as well in some cases.
Right.
So for some airlines, if a customer is in a disruption scenario where they've missed a flight because of a delay or cancellation or whatever, then the customer calls us or we proactively contact them when we see that their connection is broken and supply them with a new flight if that be the case.
So how are you seeing that connection is broken? You're manually tracking or what's the process?
That's quite recent for us. So we took just live flight stats, and so we just have a board where we see all live connections basically, and what's at risk, what's already broken, and what's at risk. So that means based on that data, on the live data, we can reach out to customers proactively with a text message or some sort of note that says your connection is broken, please get in touch, or this is we've booked you a new flight, this is your alternative flight, etc.
And I guess as the concept grows, you're going to have to scale that quite significantly, and automation and technology is going to have to be a central pillar of continuing to provide that support.
Absolutely, and that's really our focus for the past, I'd say, 2-3 years has been on the sales side, on the retailing side. So basically, being able to sell those two separate bookings in a single checkout, all the ancillaries that the airlines want to offer, and seat selection and all of these things. And now the focus is or it's not turning away from that, obviously, but we're adding to it that this customer journey, the customer journey of how certainly the happy path is quite easy. That really takes care of itself. But then the customer journey of what happens in a disruption scenario, how do we automate every step of that scenario or every step of that journey? And there's a huge piece, of course, also that we're working on around through check of bags in that sense. And that's a challenge that virtual interline or sort of these kinds of connections in general face, but something we definitely are working on.
That from my experience has been the holy grail, isn't it? It's not the person who's got a pair of legs and he can get from gate to gate. It's the bag that seems to be the real tough challenge.
Yeah, but it's something that we've been aware of. Of course, it's been kind of at the back of our minds there, but we haven't really started tackling until this year now, and now it's at the forefront of what one of the major kind of work streams for us in this year is to tackle that. And it's something that we foresee tackling with a partner rather than going after it ourselves, because we have some very interesting, fairly new companies that are specifically working around this and have access to the infrastructure that is there in place at certain airports, etc. That can be very, very interesting to work with.
That's good. So when I look at the company, there is a very noticeable expansion to the east of Keflavik, into Eastern Europe, where I think you've got some resources and some stuff into Asia. Is that because you're consistently sort of following where the low-cost market is developing, or you've just picked up customers there, or is that a more strategic piece of thinking that you've been undertaking?
Yeah, I think that's really where we see. I mean, if we think about going west, right, and you head into the US, I mean, that's a very, very different market in terms of how it's structured, in terms of the limited amount, or it's not fragmented at all like you see markets, across Asia, etc.
Yeah.
So I think there's a huge difference there, and I think that's why we are seeing, we've had somebody based in Far East in Taipei for 2 years now. So we've had somebody in Bangalore for 2 or 3 years now. So that's a strategic expansion, and we are signing up customers. I mean, in COVID, since COVID started, we've signed up Cebu, Pacific, CityLink, both be going live in the next 3 months. So we're we've been talking to several airlines in China for quite some time. We expect it to take time.
Throughout what has been an absolutely awful 12 months, the whole aviation industry and those airlines that are perhaps a bit more proactive are actually changing and redefining what they offer and how they're going to do business in the future. And that then cascades down to opportunities for people like yourself, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It's really, and that's what's been interesting. I mean, there's no sort of, there's a limited amount of bookings, but markets are waking up or sort of recovering in different timescales. So we definitely see what we saw initially in COVID is it was just complete shutdown and people just dealing with the fallout. But then you saw people sticking their head out of the sand kind of and saying, hey, this looks like a good opportunity. Let's use the time, because it's never. I mean, never does an airline have time to carefully consider things like this and implement something on that basis and have kind of peace and quiet to do it. Yeah. It's always, it's always in this sense of changing the tires on a moving car. I mean, there's always just so much going on with the current business that you have to deliver that some things don't really get in there. But then they have to start thinking differently. And also in a situation like this that might last for a couple of years, they have to start thinking, okay, how can we supplement what we were doing before with some new technology, cut down cost, and really approach life in a different way.
So, hopefully there are more people who are going to listen to this than just your wife and my wife.
Just the two of us. Yeah.
Just the two of us. Well, there'll have been four of us if we if we can get them to listen. They don't listen very often to me, I must admit. But what advice would you give to someone who is listening and is facing that strategic challenge in their business? Is now the time to really go for it, or it's those revenues are so valuable that you just carry on? What would you say to anyone who's facing this dilemma or opportunity?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, I am always of the mind that you go for opportunities when you see them, and but probably with some measure of care thrown in at this exact moment. Mm-hmm. And we are, even though yes, we raised money from SEP, a reputable UK investor, in November, and we definitely, so we have sort of cash to burn, but we are not going all out at the moment. We are being careful, and I think that should be at the moment. But if there are opportunities, and certainly, you never let a good crisis go to waste. So certainly there are opportunities at the moment that you could go after. I suppose what the mistakes that we've made in the past have been primarily maybe centered around focus or lack thereof. If you go after too many opportunities, you run into problems. Mm-hmm. And but of course you really have to properly, I think the best thing is to properly evaluate how, evaluate the opportunities and really understand whether they're worth it or not. And that's something we're taking into account a lot. Which airlines do we work with, and how do we define what's a good airline for us to work with, etc., instead of just working with anybody. In the past we've done that, and that's okay. That's been okay in the past, but that's changing a little bit now.
And I presume you're able to do that because you're coming now at this from a position of more confidence and more strength and understanding what the airline needs to bring and what its network needs to have to make these sort of things work.
Yes, that's been a learning process throughout this, is really to understand, okay, what are the success factors, etc. And exactly as you say, what does the network have to have? What appetite do they have to have? And just mindset in terms of how they approach things, whether or not they're willing to properly go after an opportunity like this with us or not. So I think that's been, there's a lot of learning around that for us over the past 3-4 years. And yes, you're right. We're able to say with more confidence, okay, this is a good airline and could be a good opportunity, but we'll choose to prioritize something else because we have to. And that has come up, I'd say, more frequently maybe in the post-COVID eras, that airlines are less willing to invest cash and resources in projects like this. Mm-hmm. And then we've taken on that role. We've said, okay, we'll invest our resources, assuming we have some sort of buy-in from the airline. But that means we have to be selective.
Yeah, you can't be all things to all people. It's just not practical. When I look at a map of the world, David, with the greatest respect, Iceland and Keflavik look a little bit lonely, don't they? So, as COVID occurred, and I know you was living in London at the time, but you still obviously had lots of contacts and were talking to people in Keflavik all the time. What did you make of how the industry responded to COVID-19? As a CEO of a business that's involved in it, what was your, if you look back in hindsight, what did you think of the way the industry handled it and what happened?
I think, in many respects, the industry handled it quite well. Obviously, it probably handled it too slowly, but that's also the nature of the industry we're in. And that's one of the problems that we face all the time. We're a startup, we want to move fast. Mm-hmm. We're a small company, we're nimble and agile. Airlines don't really move fast. Never. And that's, I think nobody was prepared, but I think roughly it was a good, generally a good response. But maybe the worst part is really what we're seeing now, is that we were all too optimistic, mm-hmm. or most of us at least. I remember reading something in March, and I thought, okay, this is going to go on for 6 or 8 months or something. But somehow I had convinced myself at the end of 2020 that 21 would somehow be better, but it seems like it's still going to get quite a bit worse before it gets better. So I think that airlines tend to plan for the long run, but I think nobody planned for it to be this bad for this long when this all started out.
It was a word that was used very often in April and May, and everyone said it was unprecedented,
Sure.
and it clearly was unprecedented. But as you said earlier, in every event is an opportunity. What did you learn personally in both your handling of your business and the business from the whole COVID event? Because there are key learnings in everything we do and everything that we experience.
Absolutely. I think from a business perspective, a situation that we would have had somebody explain to me, this is what's going to happen and you're going to have to survive, we would have said, no, that's impossible. Mm-hmm. So I suppose you can survive. And when you're really up against it, things come out of the woodwork, or you're able to pull things out of the woodwork, certainly, that allow you to survive. And I think that's always, of course, we had tons of help. I mean, like airlines have had tons of help from governments and all of these things. And we've had that as well as a company. On a personal note, I mean, it's almost the same thing. Being the CEO of this small company, my personal sort of life is very linked with it.
Absolutely, yeah.
And losing, being paid half of my salary for the better part of last year, having to, while we were in the middle of raising money, that being pulled out from under us, and then we were able to pull the investors back in, having to move from London to Reykjavík, while we were closing the financing round. I would have said that would have been impossible had somebody explained that to me beforehand. But it's the same sentiment, really. You no matter what life throws at you, you can usually survive, even though you think you may not.
Yeah, and I think the amount of people who have said to me, "I've never worked so hard for so little," is just, it resonates. I think we all feel, it's absolutely true. It's been a really, really tough year, but the nights are getting a little bit brighter in Keflavik.
Indeed.
And, we know January has been absolutely awful for the industry, and forward bookings and capacity and infection rates around the globe are not good, and the sentiment is heading in the wrong direction. But there is, and there will be, inevitably, a recovery at some point. And what do you think will be the really big changes in travel that we will see as we come out of COVID?
That's hard to say. I mean, it's I think probably the way that we approach travel. I mean, in terms of sort of, I know that from my part, I might not travel, on a personal level, I might not travel with a mask, but certainly I'll be careful what I touch and, how often I wash my hands. Mm-hmm. I think on a larger scale, I think people will think a little bit more about when they travel and for what reason, especially from a business travel perspective.
Yeah,
I don't think it will drop. I don't think there will be a significant pullback in business travel. I mean, you can't just have meetings on Teams or Zoom. That's not proper human interaction. So you still need all of those elements. And I think that's probably going to be even more valuable than ever. And you're going to make the most out of it, and you're going to, appreciate it, I suppose. I guess this freedom of traveling the globe is something we all took for granted until it was taken away.
Yeah.
And I think that's certainly going to be obvious, and as we progress.
So the frustration of a 3-hour delay at an airport, you'll just be very sanguine and think, at least I'm traveling somewhere. I think, that's probably how most of the world is going to feel as we come out of this.
Probably. I mean, we certainly are able to forget quite quickly and readjust. So once everything goes back to normal, I guess, and that's the good thing about this tough time for everyone now, is that we know somewhere that aviation kind of, when aviation struggles, usually there's a boom that follows.
Yeah.
So I think that's going to be the case here. It might be a little bit slower kind of to surface than normal, but it's going to be there. And I think, once we put all of this behind us and forget, we're probably still going to be pissed off waiting for 3 hours at an airport.
Well, yeah, particularly if there isn't a bar open. David, what in 5 years' time, the world is going to be in a better place. Aviation is going to be in a better place. What's your vision for Dohop? Is it a global business with satellite offices around the world? Will it be true to its roots in Keflavik? Is it scalable? What's the vision? What's the vision that you could share with us that you clearly shared to some UK investors in November?
Yeah, so that's the vision. It's a global company with satellite offices, mainly for, I'd say those offices would be around sort of sales, business development, customer success. The core of the development, the heart, if you will, the heartbeat, will be in Iceland for some time to come. Here we have access to very high quality of life, great people at reasonable salaries, and it's a good place to build up. So, but as a company that works with airlines and just airlines in general, I mean, I know that we need to be close to our customers and that they appreciate that, and we appreciate that as well. I mean, last 2-3 years I've spent on an aircraft essentially to be close to the customers. Then that's not really the best way to go about it.
And you probably have a better appreciation of the quality of hotels in Luton than any OAG employee, I would think.
Yes, definitely.
Well, in that case, you certainly deserve a break. David, it's been fascinating talking to you. I think you're in a really sweet space, and as you say, you've got blue ocean ahead of you, plenty of tarmac on which to run and take off and move the business forward. And I wish you every success in doing that in the coming years, because it's good to see a business grow and a business that understands what it's doing. So thank you very much for your time.
Excellent. Thank you, John. Really appreciate it.